Just in, something is quietly changing in Venezuela. And most people will not notice it while it's happening. They will only notice it later, when the effects are already impossible to ignore. There was no emergency broadcast, no dramatic announcement, no clear official explanation that tells the full story. But history teaches us something uncomfortable. The most serious changes rarely begin with chaos. They begin with silence. Over the past days, subtle signals have started to line up. Nothing explosive, nothing that immediately triggers headlines. But patterns don't need noise to exist. They only need consistency. Tonight, we are going to walk through what appears to be changing, why this moment matters more than it seems, and why almost nobody is openly addressing it yet. To understand why this deserves attention, we need to step back. Venezuela is not just another country dealing with internal challenges. Its relevance has always extended far beyond its borders. Geography, energy reserves, strategic positioning, and decades of international pressure have placed Venezuela in a unique position inside the global system. What happens there rarely stays there. For years, the public narrative surrounding Venezuela has sounded familiar: economic instability, political tension, a country portrayed as predictable in its unpredictability. But predictability is often an illusion created by repetition, and real transitions tend to happen precisely when the story feels stale. Throughout modern history, moments of major transformation have followed a similar pattern. Not a sudden collapse, not an immediate explosion, but a gradual recalibration that goes unnoticed by most people. When attention shifts elsewhere, when fatigue sets in, when a situation feels old, that is often when meaningful adjustments begin. That is why timing matters. Right now, global attention is scattered. Crises overlap. Headlines compete. And quiet developments struggle to break through the noise. That environment creates space. Space for decisions to be made without pressure. Space for repositioning without immediate scrutiny. Space for shifts that will only be fully understood in hindsight. And this is where Venezuela re-enters the picture. Recently, the tone has changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that immediately alarms the average observer, but enough to raise questions for anyone paying close attention. Official communication has become less precise. Updates feel shorter, more controlled, more carefully framed. Timelines feel open-ended rather than definitive. This kind of shift is rarely accidental. In analytical environments, silence is not treated as absence. It is treated as information. When systems prepare to adjust, they often reduce noise. When decisions are already in motion, explanations tend to lag behind actions. This does not mean something catastrophic is happening tomorrow. It means something is being managed, and management implies intention. What makes this moment particularly interesting is not any single event. It is the accumulation of small signals, small changes in language, small changes in timing, small changes in visibility. On their own, each one appears insignificant. Together, they form a pattern that deserves attention. History offers many examples of this. Before major economic shifts, communication narrows. Before political realignments, messaging becomes vague. Before structural changes, silence increases. The public often assumes nothing is happening because nothing loud is happening. That assumption is usually wrong. Change rarely announces itself clearly. It reveals itself gradually. Another important factor is how external actors behave during moments like this. Venezuela does not operate in isolation. Its internal movements are observed, analyzed, and interpreted by others with long-term interests. Those observers do not wait for press conferences. They watch signals, they watch timing, they watch silence, they watch alignment. Quiet moments are often when positioning takes place. This is why the absence of dramatic headlines does not equal the absence of meaningful movement. In fact, it often suggests the opposite. The question is not whether Venezuela is changing. The question is how deep that change runs and what phase it represents. Are we seeing early signs of transition? Are we witnessing preparation? Or are we simply watching a recalibration that will only make sense later? At this stage, certainty is impossible, but awareness is not. History rewards those who notice patterns early, even if conclusions come later. Right now, Venezuela is displaying markers that have appeared before in other contexts, markers that preceded shifts which at the time also felt quiet, technical, and unremarkable. Those moments only became obvious after they had passed. And that is why this matters now. Not because something dramatic has already happened, but because the conditions for change appear to be forming. In the next part, we are going to look more closely at those patterns, how similar moments unfolded elsewhere, what typically follows periods of institutional silence, and why these early phases are often the most important ones to understand. When we talk about silence, it's important to be precise about what that actually means. Silence is not the absence of activity. Silence is the absence of explanation. Throughout history, moments of real transition are often preceded by periods where institutions speak less, clarify less, and commit to fewer specifics, not because they have nothing to say, but because saying less provides flexibility. This pattern appears again and again. Before major economic restructurings, official language becomes technical and non-committal. Before political realignments, messaging shifts from certainty to ambiguity. Before strategic repositioning, visibility decreases. What we are seeing now fits that structure. Statements still exist, but they carry less detail. Updates still happen, but they avoid firm timelines. Information is released, but only in fragments. This is not confusion, it is control. In institutional environments, communication is rarely accidental. Every word is weighed, every omission is intentional. When silence increases, it usually signals that multiple paths are being evaluated at the same time. And once a path is chosen, the explanation comes later. That delay between decision and disclosure is where quiet change lives. This is why analysts pay close attention to what is not being said, what topics are avoided, what details are deferred, what questions remain unanswered. Those gaps often reveal more than official statements themselves. History offers several examples where the most important phase of change happened before the public realized anything had shifted. By the time people noticed, the new reality was already in place. That is why early phases matter so much. They are not dramatic. They are not emotional. They feel administrative, procedural, even boring. But they are foundational. Another key aspect is the way language evolves during these moments. Words like temporary, routine, and ongoing evaluation begin to appear more frequently. Certainty is replaced by flexibility. Commitment is replaced by possibility. This linguistic shift is subtle, but consistent. It signals that decisions are not being finalized in public, but rather behind closed doors. And that is where power usually operates most effectively. It is also important to understand that silence is often used to manage reaction. Public reaction creates pressure. Pressure limits options. When institutions reduce information flow, they buy time. Time to test outcomes, time to negotiate, time to adjust. This is not unique to any one country. It is a universal pattern in moments of recalibration. The public often interprets this as stagnation or indecision. In reality, it is usually the opposite. Movement is happening, it is just not visible yet. Another layer to consider is the international dimension. When a country holds strategic value, its quiet phases attract attention beyond its borders. External actors do not respond to speeches. They respond to signals. They monitor changes in tone. They analyze timing. They compare behavior against historical patterns. When silence increases, interest increases, because silence suggests that something is being managed rather than announced. This is why periods like this often coincide with behind-the-scenes discussions that never reach the public domain. Agreements explored quietly. Options evaluated discreetly. Scenarios modeled without confirmation. The public may see nothing, but activity does not stop. It simply shifts location. This is where misunderstanding often occurs. People assume that lack of visible crisis equals stability. But stability is not the same as stasis. Systems can be stable while still changing internally. In fact, the most durable transformations are often those that unfold without disruption. By the time disruption appears, the transformation is already complete. That is why early indicators deserve attention, not because they predict a specific outcome, but because they signal that an outcome is being shaped. At this stage, the exact direction remains unclear. Multiple paths are still possible, but the conditions suggest movement, not stagnation. This distinction matters. Stagnation implies paralysis. Movement implies intention, and intention implies choice. The silence we are observing does not feel passive. It feels deliberate. It suggests preparation rather than confusion, adjustment rather than collapse. This is often the hardest phase for the public to interpret. There are no visuals to react to. No dramatic footage, no emotional triggers, only subtle alignment. And alignment is easy to miss if you are not looking for it. In the next part, we are going to connect these patterns to broader historical cycles, how similar phases unfolded elsewhere, what typically followed prolonged periods of controlled silence, and why the consequences of these quiet moments are usually felt much later than people expect. When we look at moments like this, the most useful perspective is not prediction, it is comparison. History does not repeat itself perfectly, but it does follow recognizable rhythms. And periods of quiet adjustment have appeared many times before major transitions became obvious. In multiple countries across different decades, the sequence has been similar. First, public attention fades. The situation feels familiar. People believe they already understand the story. Then, communication becomes more controlled, less explanation, more general language. After that, small structural decisions are implemented quietly. They are framed as technical, temporary, administrative. At the time, they feel unimportant. Only later does it become clear that those early adjustments were not isolated. They were foundational. What matters most in these moments is not the individual decision, but the direction they collectively point to. That is why this phase deserves attention, not because it guarantees a specific outcome, but because it suggests that an outcome is being shaped. Right now, what we are observing fits the early stage of that pattern. There is no visible crisis demanding reaction. There is no dramatic collapse forcing explanation. Instead, there is alignment of timing, alignment of language, alignment of silence. This kind of alignment rarely happens by accident. It usually reflects an internal consensus that something needs to change, even if the final form of that change has not yet been revealed. Another important element is pace. Rapid collapses capture attention, but they are not the most common form of transformation. More often, systems evolve slowly until they reach a point where the new reality suddenly feels unavoidable. By the time that point arrives, the groundwork has already been laid. That is why moments like this are often misunderstood. People expect change to announce itself clearly, to arrive with a warning, to demand immediate reaction. But structural change does not operate that way. It operates through preparation. Preparation is quiet. Preparation avoids attention. Preparation minimizes resistance. And preparation almost always looks boring in real time. That is one reason why these phases receive so little coverage. They do not produce images. They do not produce sound bites. They do not fit neatly into a headline. Yet they shape what comes next more than any dramatic event ever could. This is also where the international dimension becomes impossible to ignore. When a country holds strategic relevance, its quiet phases are never ignored by those who matter most. They may not comment publicly, they may not react openly, but they observe, they analyze, they adjust their own positioning accordingly. This silent feedback loop is one of the least visible forces in global dynamics. One country adjusts quietly, others notice. They respond quietly as well. The public only becomes aware when the accumulated effect reaches the surface. At that point, reactions feel sudden, but the process was anything but sudden. This is why hindsight often feels cruel. People look back and say the signs were obvious, the signals were there, the pattern was clear. In reality, those signals are easy to dismiss when they are happening. They do not demand urgency, they do not force action, they simply exist. And that makes them easy to overlook. Right now, the situation does not call for panic. It calls for awareness. It calls for understanding that not all change is loud, not all shifts are announced, and not all turning points feel important when they begin. The fact that things feel calm is not proof that nothing is happening. It is often proof that something is being managed carefully. This distinction is critical because when the public finally feels the effects, the window for influence is usually already closed. Decisions have been made, paths have been chosen, alternatives have narrowed. What remains at that stage is reaction, not participation. That is why early observation matters, even when conclusions remain uncertain. At this point, no single narrative explains everything. Multiple interpretations remain possible. But one thing is consistent. Periods of extended institutional silence combined with subtle alignment rarely represent stability. They represent transition. And transitions, by definition, move towards something different than what existed before. Whether that difference is positive, negative, or simply inevitable depends on factors that are still unfolding. But the direction of movement matters more than the speed. Right now, movement appears to be happening beneath the surface, quietly, deliberately, without explanation. And history suggests that when change operates this way, the most important moment is not when everyone starts talking about it. The most important moment is before that happens, when signals are still subtle, when silence still dominates, when attention has not yet returned. Because by the time the shift becomes obvious, the question is no longer what is changing. The question becomes whether anything could have been done differently. Something is quietly changing in Venezuela, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. And by the time it becomes impossible to ignore, it may already be